This is a show about communication, about getting your message across, about connecting with people, whether you're in a two-person meeting or presenting on stage to hundreds of people. The scale of it doesn't matter, the aims are the same. I'm Maryanne Johnston, and I help clients to present their ideas with a clear and confident delivery. I also help them to prepare and create a structure for their content so it's engaging and memorable for their audience. And critically, I ensure they're using their relaxed conversational style at all times. Communication is rarely straightforward, and we may be facing many different listeners in different environments on a daily basis. And how we feel during those interactions may also vary on a daily basis. This show is all about learning the skills and techniques to enable you to be agile in the way you handle these interactions as you move around your daily life. In this season, we're discussing conflict and how to resolve it, and I'm delighted to be joined by Drew Drummond. Drew is the Managing Director of Drummond International, an award-winning Edinburgh-based leadership consultancy helping individuals and organisations to navigate change, build culture, and resolve conflict. He's a highly regarded, accredited mediator, and Drew empowers teams through storytelling and lived experiences across diverse sectors. His experience spans from the corporate sector, supporting a range of different executives and teams and leadership development, to the not-for-profit sector with Columba 1400, and the public sector, working with a number of local authorities across Scotland. First and foremost, though, he's a family man. Drew describes himself as a good dad and admits he's only considered putting his 3 beautiful children on eBay twice. In this final episode on conflict, we're going to run a question and answer session with Drew to bring together his advice and strategies on more specific situations. I'm drawing these situations from my life and work experience, patterns and behaviours that I've seen over the years, as well as a couple of questions that came in from listeners. Drew, it's so good to see you again. Thank you for making time for another conversation with me.
Maryanne, thank you. It's always an honour to be invited back anywhere. So just to have the opportunity and really looking forward to, I suppose, doing this together, because there's no right or wrong, but ultimately how we choose to respond rather than react is so important.
No, I really appreciate your time. I'm conscious that most podcasts nowadays are more about, the person being interviewed only has to turn up once. But each time we talk, I'm finding I get interviewers' regret, where I realise afterwards there's so much more that I want to talk about with you. So
Gosh.
very grateful for you to come back again.
Well, thank you. Can I get that in writing so I can show my family?
So I have got 4 scenarios to discuss with you today, and I'm just going to dive straight into the first one, which I think this is probably a situation that many people might relate to. Many of us will have people in our lives, whether it's a colleague, a team member, senior or junior, or even a family member, who seem to take everything personally. So, even the smallest bit of feedback or a casual comment can feel like it triggers hurt or defensiveness, which then might lead to feeling like every interaction is unpredictable, because one day they might be fine and it might all feel like it's running smoothly, but the next day the response could be wildly different. What is the best way to handle conflict with someone who takes everything to heart without making the situation worse?
So, great question. And I think every single listener will have, personally or professionally, the scenario along the lines that you describe. And I think what I'd like to do is just to show throughout 2 or 3 kind of tools, approaches that I consider helpful. And yeah, you're very welcome to come back to me to explore any of those. But I think the first one, when it comes to conflict, we're very good at looking at what the other side are doing, at often the expense of where am I in all of this. And just by having the awareness to recognize that someone is taking something very, very personally is a great, great first step. However, I think what I would offer and encourage by way of self-care, and we're very good about laminating self-care, but not actually living it. And when it comes to conflict, I think it's really, really important that we make sure that there is time to think about, how do I ground to make sure that I know what day of the week it is. I know that I'm Drew Drummond, that I know that it's sunny outside or it's raining outside, and I just get into the present moment, because
Hmm.
we can run away in our own heads around the mistake is mine, or the conflict, I've done something wrong. And particularly when you're in a kind of a position where you're being line managed by something, it's very easy to think that you are responsible for every single feeling that the person who's taking things personally holds. And how important it is, by grounding and reflecting on that, I think that gives you a far more level playing field to recognize what is their stuff and what is your stuff. Okay? What is theirs and what is yours? And I find that very, very helpful, because it gives you a sense of a level playing field, that you're able to recognize that behavior in them and have clear boundaries around what is their behavior, and also that it's not your fault, or it's not all on you.
Hmm.
Now, that's fine in the sort of, I suppose, the early stages. And if you're working with this person, you might need to use that technique an awful lot, because every day your whole mood might be determined by that person's behavior. And ultimately, where you are is being able to choose how you respond to that. And that's what the grounding and the awareness and reflection piece is for you to have a choice. Okay, every day I'm going to choose to respond in a different way. I'm going to carry on in terms of the next kind of opportunity, in that there's two more that I'd like to kind of share. But the first is really picking up on what I would call that trusted other. And
Mm.
actually, if you're feeling this repeatedly for over a month, I think it's pretty important that you find someone, and it doesn't matter whether they work within the organization or whether they work outside of the organization, but you find someone that you know loves you, and you find someone that will be able to listen to you, just for you, what I call to be sick on the table, because we carry an awful lot. And
Yeah.
actually, to be able to park it, to be able to put it somewhere, I can promise you will feel better. But make sure you don't do it to the first person that you bump into, which can also happen. And actually, what I would encourage you not to do is to go and have a conversation with the vending machine or the water cooler, because that's not helpful.
Yeah.
That is just, when the wind is blowing against you, rather than going into the circle of narrative that this is how I am defined, that's you reacting. That's not choosing how to respond. So I
Yeah.
think really, really important that trusted other, and you can value them for you, and actually they can help offer their perspective, which may or may not be what's required. But I think the fact that they've been asked, and the fact that you've chosen, I've got a boundary here, and this
Hmm.
is how I'm dealing with it, I think that's really, really important.
And
And then,
it's finding somebody who you know is not going to judge you, as you say, who's going to love you, whatever. But just knowing that you can feel that you can drop them a message and say, "Can you let me know when you've got 10 minutes to have a conversation?" And I've got somebody like that in my circle of family and friends. Sometimes I'll just ring up and say, "Can I just have a quick rant?"
yeah.
And that person knows they don't need to give any advice or feedback or anything. It can just be, "Can you just listen? I just need," sometimes it's offloading, isn't it? And being able to just share and talk rather than think. Because as you say, we can carry so much, and sometimes just speaking it out loud to somebody, or maybe writing it down, is a way to get perspective on what's going on.
I couldn't agree more, and I'd almost see the trusted other a bit like a muscle, in that if you don't use it, it's not going to be there for you when you need it.
Hmm.
And so, even when you have conflict, or you're in a situation where you feel slightly uncomfortable, I would also encourage you to make sure. I think what you've just described beautifully there is you've actually contracted with someone before the conversation starts, saying, "Look, I'm just having a bit of a download here."
Yeah.
and I need to kick the budgie and I need you to be a sounding board. I
Yeah.
think it's really important that we do that when the sun is shining and we're 3-0 up, just as much as we do that for when we're 3-0 down. Because if we always use it when we're 3-0 down, we define that only when I'm 3-0 down. And
Yeah.
actually, you're a whole human being before you get into your conflict. And a lot of us go to the conflict and feel defined by that.
Yeah.
And I think this is really the approaches that I've offered in response to your first scenario, Maryanne, is really to make sure that we kind of look after ourselves and that you can take that those approaches forward with confidence.
Yeah. And with the individual themselves, if you're feeling that there's this unpredictable nature each time, I mean, it may be, I remember talking to someone about a situation like this, and they said you could tell by the way the individual was walking in the morning what kind of a day this might feel like, and that's a very hard thing to handle, isn't it?
Just, I mean, I'm hanging on to this, the part of looking after the internal,
Yeah.
in that as part of that choice, if this is becoming a repeated, continued kind of place, at what point do you make a choice that is this the right environment for me?
Hmm.
And at what point do you also say, do I want to challenge this person, or do I want to try and offer this person a bit of a kind of a way forward, or for them to be able to, I suppose, have an understanding of how it makes you feel?
Yeah.
And, that's much easier to talk about on a podcast than it is to do in real life, Maryanne. But I do think really preparing and having a think through what would be the steps around how I might do that. What you don't want to do is to react to that in response to how they have made you feel. What you want to do is to do that from a really grounded position. You've prepared, you've thought it through, and that you're able to think about. And what do I mean by that? That's having the conversation off site.
Yeah.
Okay. That's maybe going for a walk, and that's being able to make sure you've got the 3 points that you really want to get across, rather than, and you have to accept that it's not going to be perfect and that it might not go in straight lines, or you might need to revisit it. But that's always very helpful intel, because that gives you where you are for you to make an informed decision rather than a reactive decision.
Yeah.
So it's really tough, that, and I think we can all feel, and I'm talking to all the listeners here, situations when our stomach's gone upside down because a person makes it. But I would encourage to walk to it, but in a very prepared and cared for yourself way,
Yeah.
rather than rushing to try and win, which is what a lot of people are looking for in today's society, is I'm right, you're wrong. And I would encourage that it's by taking a far more kind of softly approach that you're able to navigate the choice for that person to be able to take that reflection on board, because you can't control that.
Yeah.
And we need to know that there's a full stop around what you can do, but you can always have a choice in that, is this the place for me?
Yeah. And it's so important, isn't it, um to head towards it rather than avoid or walk away, isn't there? Because I suppose there's another piece here, which is that perhaps the individual in question isn't really aware of how their behavior or their experiences are affecting everybody else within their team or within the business. And also, I mean, I always talk about, when we're preparing for any kind of communication, you've got to think about the audience first. There is, of course, a piece here where we're thinking, well, so what's happening in that person's life that, what you're seeing is that person walking and thinking, oh no, oh help, look at the way they're walking and they look like they're having a bad day. I wonder what's causing that bad day. I wonder what's behind all of that. So there's a bit about awareness of how they might be feeling, what's going on in their lives, which we can't make any assumptions about. But also, I think, important to, yeah, as you say, find a trusted other, have a conversation off site, because if they may not be aware of how their behaviors are affecting everybody else. So yeah, really important to get it out in the open, to talk about it,
Yeah.
isn't it?
And also, if you're I imagine, there will be people who work in teams, there will be people who are the newest joined employee. And just for the listener's perspective, I think you can almost see this as a bit of a palette of choices of how you can respond, which
Mm.
very often, when you're in the moment, you only think you've got one way to respond. So just, I suppose, by sort of opening that up, and a big part is, if it is an issue, and a lot of the work that Drummond International does is being able to create the time and space for those conversations. Because ultimately, it's by having those conversations that people do come back and they have a deeper, better relationship of trust because they know that they can go through a tough situation together and come out the other side. So
Yeah.
I echo what you're was suggesting in terms of actually go to the problem.
Yeah.
I don't rush it. Make sure it's considered. But I can say from first-hand experience that people do feel better, albeit might feel desperately uncomfortable or fearful in the moment. But actually coming out the other side, more often than not, people are better for it and teams are more effective.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So the second question, we've touched on the trusted other. So I'm going to go to a question that we were asked about on that. In episode 3, you talked about having a trusted other. This listener says, I've recently found myself in the position of being the trusted other, and I'm not happy at all with the way the other person is handling the conflict situation. But I don't know whether I should say anything to them or just listen. I'm finding the situation stressful. What would you advise?
The sort of immediate response in terms of that trusted other is that a trusted other works both ways in that this person values who you are, and actually, at what point are you valuing who they are? And if it was to be, talking to a family friend or a son or a daughter, for example, you would really want to make sure that you are able to give your side, your perspective. And I think that is a big part of being a trusted other, that they have come to you, albeit it sounds like in this scenario, they're not necessarily maybe listening or welcoming of that other perspective. But I
Mhm.
think if you're feeling it, it's telling you something. And if you're
Yeah.
feeling it, I think it's really, really important that we take the time to, what I would call in our kind of conflict resolution approaches, is to recontract.
Yeah.
Okay, is actually to say, this is how I'm feeling, this is who and what I can offer. But ultimately, by recontracting and even just saying that word it's a bit like a jolt to things just can't keep going on the way they are going.
Mhm.
And it gives the person the opportunity, the choice to respond to that around, okay, do I listen or are we agreeing that I'm not the right person to be the trusted other? But by recontracting and saying, look, for how we have our meetings or how you are responding, there has to be a point where I'm able to give my perspective and that you're able to reflect on that because that's the space that I hold. And I think what you're really doing is just making sure that the role of trusted other is really valued because it's
Yeah.
not just being a pal where you're just talking about, the weather.
Yeah.
This is actually being there and saying, do you know what? For you to be at your best, this is what I see. This is what I think. So to the person asking the question, I think I would encourage them to really sort of take a sort of values-based leadership approach and be able to rename and reset out, actually, this is what my place is in this conversation, and this is how we can make it work.
Yeah. It's a two-way contract, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Actually, I suppose the other part, as you were talking about that there, I was thinking that as the trusted other, yes, that relationship between yourself and the person who's talking to you and offloading to you, you are then it's being loaded onto you, isn't it? You are absorbing everything that they are sharing with you. So yes, I can see how it's really important to keep coming back to recontracting and being able to say how you feel at any certain point, or perhaps there's a point as being the trusted other where you have to recognize that maybe you're not the right person for that role anymore.
And I think we can spend an awful lot of time when someone has had the courage to come and say, I need your help, that you feel that you are the only person that can help.
Mm.
I think that's another massive, massive learning for me in my experience is that you've got your perspective and there may well be other people that are, and that's still being a trusted other. I've had many times where I've maybe not quite sort of had to hold my hand up and say, look, I appreciate we're talking like this, but can I put you in touch with such and such? And they're
Mm.
someone who I trust. And I think that just lets people know that we're human. And also, I think gives people a sense of permission to be good at what they're really good at, as well as trying to be head of answers of everything.
The next question is another one that's come from a listener. So I'm going to read this one out. So they've said, I have two work colleagues who are constantly in disagreement with each other. Both of them sound off to me. I don't want to be involved. Do you have any suggestions?
I think taking on some of the approaches that I have offered in my first answer, I think that's a helpful starting point to make sure you put yourself in that. When you've got two people, that means you've got two loads of sick coming at you. Okay. And that's a lot. And
That's
you're
a lot.
carrying that on top of, and that can then also have an impact on you personally and professionally. And
Yeah.
so I think it's just being mindful of that. So that's why I was sort of making sure that in conflict, we look after the internal before we go to the external. And I think this scenario particularly highlights that because I'm just picturing the poor person where they're trying to get a proposal or an email or a meeting prepared for or done, and someone comes and knocks on the door, and they've still got to do all that work, but they've taken someone else's stuff. And I think by the listener who has asked that question, the fact they're asking the question suggests something needs to be done about this.
Yeah,
And I think that's
absolutely.
really, really kind of important around, just being able to, again, choose how you respond, and that if they're coming regularly, you're gently able at the end of the conversation be able to say, look, this is my boundary. This is the bit that I will do. This is the bit that I will not do.
Mm.
But I would be offering, encouraging them that they ask the question, what have you done about it? Or what are you going to do about it? Because it's not good enough just to come and park, but actually what people in that situation, unfortunately, their whole narrative can be defined by the next drop plate, and they actually find themselves looking for reaffirmation of the behavior that they get so frustrated or angry about, and
Yeah.
unable to see the whole human being and actually what this was you were saying earlier and what they might have going on in the rest of their lives, or whatever challenge professionally or personally might be happening kind of right now. And so we can get sort of slightly focused singularly on the area that defines our narrative. And I think the offer to the response to the person who's asked the question is that might they offer that as a wee love nudge, as I call it, a wee love nudge to the people that are coming to be sick on them. And then if that still isn't reaching a better resolution to where things are moving to, because it might need your help as that person to scaffold what the
Yeah.
boundaries are rather than being head of answers. Because a lot of time when people are in conflict, they come to you to fix it. And actually, the real skill in any kind of conflict resolution is being able to give the people the skills to try and find a way forward for themselves. And that
Yeah.
scaffolding is where there's a real art, a real skill there that I think in the same way that we parent our children when they're at primary age, we're pretty much telling them, guiding them, directing them where to go. But at secondary school, you kind of want to let them go and make a few mistakes themselves. And actually, it's how you are there for them when they make those mistakes. And I would offer to the listener asking that question that just having that mindset, that thought process could be helpful in that it's okay. Not everything is perfect for
Mm.
them to go and make a mistake, but try and navigate it through themselves.
Yeah.
The bit that I've not landed on is there will come a point where you've got to pull people into a conversation and just call it out and say whatever you need to say, but ultimately this is having an impact on me, and actually that's not good enough. And if you're able to see the impact it's having on the rest of the organization, because if it's reached you, I'm pretty sure everyone else will know about it. And ultimately, I think it's really important that you have in your head before they come knocking on your door, what is the irreducible minimum? What is the point that you say, I'm going to call it, I'm going to put their heads together, and we need to make this a single issue priority to try and agree or disagree so we can find a way forward for the benefit of everyone rather than being right or being felt to be kind of head of answers, as I was saying previously.
Yeah, because it sounds as if it's a situation where it's almost just a pattern,
Yeah,
constantly in disagreement, and therefore it just becomes a constant pattern. But as you say, yeah, perhaps for the individual asking the question, if you don't want to be involved, don't be involved. And
yeah,
and as you say, you don't have to have the answers, and you don't necessarily, you don't have to volunteer to be that trusted other, do you? If you don't want to be involved, then, as you say, calling it out, or if you're within an organization where there's HR, or you've got a line manager or a mentor who you can go to and let them know about it, so that these people can move forward in some way.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
think I'd like to share a personal reflection. In my first managerial position, I thought I needed to be Superman and I thought I needed to do everything. And it was really tough when, fantastic sort of 18 months. And then all of a sudden it was all sort of blowing up and going completely where I felt responsible for everything. And I think what I'd like to reflect back, you're not responsible for everything. You can hold the boundaries and you can be the guide, but
Mm.
ultimately, and there does come a point if it crosses your lines where you can stand up and call it. And I wish I'd given the very advice I'm giving you on this podcast. I'd wish I'd given that to my younger self.
Yeah. Well, we live and learn, don't we?
Yeah.
I think that that trusted other, feels like a role that we'd like to be, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You want to feel it's a compliment to be that trusted other. It's if we're the person that everybody is offloading to, that's in a sense that's a nice feeling, because you think, well, they trust me. They know that I'll listen. They know that I'll make time for it. But it's clearly not always the best
And
role to be, is it?
And I don't know if you would agree with me or not, Maryanne, but we're absolutely sort of fantastic at overcomplicating things.
Mm.
Okay, a trusted other is someone I feel safe with. Full stop. Okay, and so I think that's a real test to put a person through if they make you feel like that, and they don't come around every day of the week. So I think,
Yeah.
just for you to be able to choose that, to tell your own central nervous system, this is what it feels like when I'm regulated and I feel safe. Because in conflict, often we're in high alert and we're in
Yeah.
fight or flight. And I think it's really important that we have the life skills to be able to bring ourselves to what it feels like. And the best person that is able to tell you what that feels like is a trusted other.
Yeah. I do think as we've had these conversations, there's been something that's been coming back to me quite a lot, which is we're talking around this about, if you are the individual who's experiencing seeing a conflict in your life that you are involved in or needing to manage or navigate. And it almost feels like the person we're thinking about isn't necessarily a person that's creating or causing the conflict. And these examples, the questions that we're discussing are other people in conflict and the individual, the questioner, being on the sidelines of it. I do feel the thing that keeps coming back to me is, if we're listening to this, having an awareness of, are you the person that's creating these behaviors? Are you in your workplace just having an awareness, having a think about the situations, the relationships that you're in as you're listening to this and thinking, gosh, actually, is that me? I hadn't thought about that. Hadn't thought that that particular discussion, or that the way I behaved when I came in this morning might have affected somebody like that. So I just wanted to mention it because it's really made me think about all the different parties within this.
I mean, this is again a choice for if you're that person where you're questioning whether am I the one that's creating that conflict, or I think first and foremost just reflecting for yourself, taking a blank sheet of paper and scribbling down to kind of reflect on, if it happens once or twice, it's a behavior. And if it happens more than that, it's a pattern.
Mm.
And I think you can, hold the mirror up to yourself, I think is an offering or approach. The courageous leadership part is to go and check in with a person who you really value. And again, I wouldn't be calling that necessarily trusted other within your work kind of situation with a conflict, because they may be surprised, or it might not be everyday natural conversation, but it does show that you are able to go and hold the light and the dark in the same hand and
Mm.
be able to go and ask someone for that feedback. And I think, even if you're not the person creating it, it's not a bad conversation to go and have, like you were leading in with the question around, let's have the awareness to be able to talk about how do we deal with when things aren't working.
Yeah.
And you can almost scenario plan that as well, just to be able to give people a bit of a permission that it's okay to feel safe when things that were out with our control might not be working in the way that we would hope.
Yeah.
And so I would really encourage the questioning no bad thing, about question self first
Yeah.
and see what comes. Sit with that. It doesn't have to be done in a couple of hours, but also just in the coming weeks or months, just now and again, be able to check in. And you'll be fascinated what comes back to you. I think, one of the things that people love, irrespective of their job title or job description, is being asked, what do you think? And
Mm.
how can we be better? I mean, that doesn't necessarily need to come. Do you remember the last time when we had a falling out? I do think that the more that we can do that, we can move ourselves away from having to be right all the time. And how do we understand? And I think ultimately that's what conflict resolution is endeavoring to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also for there's something that we've touched on as we've been chatting about this as well, about if if you're the person that's going into work who's feeling stressed from whatever's going on in life. I mean, I think we've all been there, right? It feels like by 8 o'clock you've already fought many battles just to get out the door. And I know that I've walked out the door, been driving up to Edinburgh to deliver a day's course, and I feel exhausted because the battles I've just been through to get everybody out the door to get to where they need to be on time. More with when my children were younger, your fists are clenched as you're heading into work to then meet the people that you're then going to be with for the day, to be achieving things, working with, etc., whatever your job is. And it's also, I think, that self-awareness, and for me personally, what I do in that situation is on my commute to where I'm going. You talked about grounding yourself and really thinking about your own behavior. That's where I'll start to do things like perhaps breathing techniques, just to really slow everything down and calm myself down. I'll really think about who it is I'm going to be with today and what is it we want to achieve. And I just really give myself permission to give that time and space to think about what I'm doing, so that once I've arrived, whatever's been going on has washed away.
I am I'm only slightly envious of you that you said that happened when your children were younger. I think that happens with me when, kind of even maybe this morning. But it was just, I think, what you've described and what you've offered is such a gift for people in terms of, I think, do you have a toolkit which has got to be your own, and you
Yeah.
find what works for you? It's
Yeah.
not saying, right, eat this and you'll be all right. Okay, because we do that too much.
Yeah.
But ultimately, having your toolkit that you can go to at any time in terms of that routine, to be able to know that the wind can be blowing it against you in one sense, but when it comes to turning up and presenting and whatever your job might be that is different from what you've just left, is that you've got clear sort of boundaries as well as approaches to being able to kind of ultimately be at your best for
Exactly.
where that is. But it,
Yeah.
it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but finding your approach to grounding.
Yeah.
I would also, rather than waiting for the conflict to arise to find a place to ground, I would practice grounding regularly. For myself, I've found a cycle and a cold water swim on a Sunday. means that I can sort of not just feel alive because of the coldness of the water, but it is also connected to making sure that I can, I suppose, be at my best for when those situations happen and
Yeah.
the school uniform isn't right and it needs to get sorted, or when I need to make sure that there's someone who is in a mediation situation that I need to reframe so that they can make a choice that lets them not be defined by the conflict that they've been kind of eaten up by or overwhelmed by.
Okay, so Drew, final question for you. Now, I recognize it's important to be tactful and to handle conflict with care, but I've also seen teams where the communication culture is more blunt, but it seems to work. And just to give a bit of context to this, one company I'm thinking about they're a small team. They span the leader of the team being in their 50s through to more junior team members being late teens, early 20s. They're often working in high stress environments. It's physical work that they're doing. They communicate regularly. They get on well, but of course, sometimes there is conflict, whether it's between themselves or between them and their clients. And often the communication's quite blunt. They don't beat about the bush. And it's fascinating because it works. And I do wonder, having seen and experienced how this team work, I do wonder whether sometimes there's a place for just simply being direct, saying it like it is without beating around the bush. What do you think about that?
I admire the organization that you talk about in that what they have done is they have created the conditions for anyone, irrespective of age, to feel safe even when the challenges happen, even in conflict situations. So there's a lot of work that will have gone in there, which is unseen, that is maybe even unsaid, but it's how people feel. And that I think there is a time and a place when to my children I say, right, we need to shoot straight, and that's where we're looking straight in the eye and we're saying, have you done, or we're saying, how can we do this better, or what do we need to do differently kind of next time. And that's a personal example, but also I think what you describe in being able to create the time of day or the space or the environment where it's absolutely okay to say, this is not good enough and we need to do it this way, or I've got a problem here and what are you going to do about it, which is sounds quite direct and quite threatening just even as I say it. And I'm recognizing myself, for some people, that's where, and I think the organization you describe has actually created the conditions to be able to understand that there will be other points in the day where you can follow up and check in on a far more sort of softly, more human level. And
Yeah,
I'm not suggesting it's not human, but what I suppose, trying to say is that I think a lot of people define themselves by one type of communication or by one type of handling conflict. And what has happened and what you've described in this scenario is ultimately people can be all of themselves. They can be human and, they can have good days and they can have bad days. But if you're in a strop and you need to kick a budgie, you do it here and you do it directly, you know? And I think by setting those conditions, that means whoever you are, and, even from my example I gave of how I wish I'd give myself a bit of the advice I'm giving your listeners now, myself younger, that's a live example of if you've got Generation Z and Generation X and Y all in the same place and they've got a way of communicating, that is to their credit. That's really, really strong. We can learn from that because ultimately, I'm not saying everything's going to be shining bright, but then when it's not shining bright, at least you'll know about it. And
yeah,
do you know what the great thing is? You get a good night's sleep because when you finish work, you can switch off and you can get on with the rest of your life. And
yeah.
now, I hope that for some of your listeners, that might be helpful, a wee helpful love nudge your direction. And what do you need to do to make sure communication and managing a conflict, you've got your clear internal strategies, but external and done really well means that you can go and actually focus on the things you really want to focus on rather than having them hijacked.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting because some of the examples that I've listened to around that particular organization, it's, sometimes you think, crikey, is that actually what they said? Is that actually what happened? And you do, as you say, instinctively, I think, oh gosh, okay, that seems very direct. But as you say, I think almost as listening to you just talking just then, as you sort of zoom out of it and think, well, actually, you said back in the first conversation we had that if people feel listened to, valued, and have a sense of belonging, that's almost the scaffold around it. Is that right?
As human beings, they're the three things that we need.
Yeah,
Okay,
we all need that.
that is it. And I
And so
appreciate.
actually, if that's what's happening throughout your organization for everybody, if those are the three things that we're experiencing, then yeah, it's so interesting that the way that you are then communicating with people will shift. It can change.
I mean, it's almost by recognizing your reaction, great first step. And what that organization has been able to do is recognize all the reactions of the individuals which they kind of are responsible for and hold. And they have found a way by conversation, by experience, by giving it a go. I don't know, but that they know when is the time and place to be direct,
Yeah.
when is the time and place to have a laugh, and when is the time and place to get the job done.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, not too bad an offering by way of a tool or a suggestion as a listener to think about when might you go and speak to the people that you work with, the people that you live with, and say, when do we call it? And how do we do that? This is before there's a conflict happening. Very often we wait too long until the conflict's on the table.
Yeah.
And then when do we have a laugh and enjoy that? And, what do we laugh about?
Yeah.
And then when the work gets done, how do we call it that this is important? Let's go. And if you're also able as a leader to be able to share how you do each of those, you are role modeling to your team how that has. And if you have any chinks along the way around, actually, I could do that better or different, tell them about it. That's being human.
Yeah.
And that means that when you do get faced with a challenge or a conflict and you need to be more direct, you've actually contracted that this is how we're going to play. That means people are able to, from a trusted other feeling of safety, be able to push that boundary out a bit and hopefully get to a place, whatever happens when we're 3-0 up, 3-0 out, because there's a lot of this stuff we can't control. That they're able to, I can still be in a situation that is challenging, but I know what I need to do to be safe or feel safe.
Brilliant. Drew, thank you so much again for your time. I have really enjoyed getting into these more practical tips and techniques of handling some of these situations that we've discussed today. I still feel like we've only scratched the surface, but I hope that this has helped our listeners to see in different scenarios they might be facing a clear way through the conflict that they might be facing.
Well, Maryanne, thank you. It's been a real privilege just to be given the time and the conditions just to be able to talk through some of those practical tips, because I've used this previously around. It's very easy to tick those things. It's harder to live them. And I
Yeah.
think that is what we need right now, individually, as communities, as societies, families, is just to be able to think about, okay, what do we need to do that is practical? And actually, how can we follow that through to make that happen? There's a quote, if I may, by a writer called James Baldwin. And he says, unfortunately, there is not enough humanity in the world right now, but there's enough. And all of you listeners and Maryanne, we're enough. And we can get through this. And ultimately, I wish you well and just want to say thank you for the opportunity.
I've learned so much from these conversations with Drew. When you look up the meaning of the word conflict, we find definitions with the word struggle, clash, disagreement, dispute. And I think that's why, personally, as we all discovered in an earlier episode, I am an avoider. Conflict has always felt like it has an edge to it. But now I'm viewing it in a different light, as a feeling, something that we must recognize exists and learn these skills around how to navigate it and not let it define us. If we can take Drew's 3 points around ensuring people are listened to, valued, and have a sense of belonging, and make them our compass for life, then I think we'd be doing well. The first time I met Drew, we were delivering our own courses within a 2-day leadership program arranged by a client. Drew joined the workshop that I ran on the first day as an attendee, and afterwards we had lengthy conversations about our work and how much it complements each other. The skills I talk about around communication are critical within resolving conflict, from preparing a structure of ideas on how a conversation might go to allow you to think on your feet, to the skills around maintaining a calm composure if you're feeling the pressure, or if emotions are running high or you're stressed. It was a no-brainer to invite him onto the Agile Speaker podcast and have this conversation, and I'm confident that there is still more to talk about. Thank you for listening to the Agile Speaker. We hope you've enjoyed listening. Please share this episode with anyone in your network who may need support in handling conflict. If you want to learn more about Drew and his work, head to www.drummondinternational.com. And if you want to tap into our latest insights and resources and be the first to hear about new podcasts and courses, head to www.maryannejohnston.co.uk and sign up to our newsletter.